17 kindergartners vanished without a trace, until agents broke into a sealed underground classroom hidden behind a painted wall at their own school. The room was spotless, ready for class, and the whiteboard still read, "Today we learn about animals that live in the dark." But there were no children, only a blinking camera. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Tuesday mornings at Clover Hill Elementary followed a sacred rhythm. School buses rumbled in by 7:45, the flag was raised at 8 o'clock, and classroom doors shut promptly at 8:10. It was a neighborhood school surrounded by trimmed hedges and two-story homes where the parents knew each other, organized potlucks, and trusted the system. The kind of place where trouble never came without a warning. Which is why Principal Meredith Sloan first assumed it was a mix-up. At 8:23 a.m., she was halfway through checking emails when the front office line rang. It was Trina Morales, mother of 5-year-old Henry Morales. Trina's voice was tight, strained. She said she'd knocked on the door of room 3, the kindergarten classroom, and no one answered. She'd walked Henry in a little late due to a dentist appointment, but when they arrived, the hallway was quiet. The lights in room 3 were off. No laughter. No sounds of a class in session. Just silence. Meredith muted the call, looked at her attendance dashboard, and blinked. Room 3 hadn't checked in yet. That wasn't unusual on its own. Substitutes often forgot to hit the attendance button, but Meredith had a habit. She pulled up the camera feed for that hallway. Black screen. Camera 3 had gone offline sometime before 7 o'clock a.m. She stood up and walked briskly past the nurse's office, down the east wing corridor toward room 3. The hallway lights were on, but the far end felt dimmer than usual. She tried the door. Locked. Her key turned with effort. When she opened it, she stopped cold. The room was immaculate. 17 miniature backpacks hung neatly in the cubbies, jackets zipped and hung, lunchboxes sealed and labeled. 2 substitute name tags, Ms. Flora and Mr. Reed, were placed on the teacher's desk, along with a handwritten welcome note. But there were no students. No chairs were pulled out, no pencils on desks, no signs of a lesson in progress or even a messy delay. Just absence. She called the front desk and ordered a full lockdown. The police arrived within 8 minutes. Teachers herded confused students into classrooms. Parents began to gather out front. Rumors moved faster than facts. By 9:15, the district superintendent had been notified. By 9:40, the first local news van was pulling into the lot. 17 5-year-olds had entered Clover Hill Elementary that morning. None of them had left. Detective Lyle Bracken had seen his share of confusion in school settings, custody mix-ups, panicked parents, even cases where a kid had simply wandered off to the wrong classroom and fallen asleep in a reading nook. But as he stepped into the kindergarten room at Clover Hill Elementary, he knew immediately this was not that. The room hadn't been vacated in haste. It had been prepared. Every backpack in the cubbies was zipped shut. Every child's seat was pushed in. The whiteboard bore the day's schedule, handwritten in green marker. 8:15. Morning circle, 8:30. Story time, 9 o'clock. Art. The handwriting was unfamiliar, loopier than Mrs. Lively's usual script. Bracken's partner, Detective Shelley Brooks, photographed the 2 name tags left on the desk. Ms. Flora and Mr. Reed. Generic, printed on index cards, tucked into clear plastic clips. No last names, no IDs, no HR paperwork in the sub-binder. "I need verification on who authorized these 2, Bracken said. Within an hour, the school district's Human Resources Director, Ellen Kirsch, confirmed it. No one by those names had been scheduled. In fact, the system listed room 3 as unassigned. The substitute request had gone in, but had not been filled. Mrs. Lively, the regular teacher, had undergone gallbladder surgery 5 days prior. Her automated absence request had been logged and approved, but no response came from the substitute pool. There was no confirmation email, no logged acceptance, no background check on file. Nothing. Yet someone had arrived that morning with keys, lesson plans, and enough authority to gather 17 children into a classroom and vanish. Bracken pulled security footage. Cameras in the East Wing, rooms 1 through 4, showed blank feeds. The system marked the cameras as disconnected due to surge protection override. IT support found that phrase suspicious. That override function had been removed 2 years ago during a firmware update. Someone had manually tampered with the camera feed, someone who knew how to silence the system from the inside. "Pull entry logs," Bracken ordered. The building's smart lock system showed staff fob activity starting at 6:12 a.m. That scan was tied to Mrs. Lively's badge, a badge that should have been locked in the teacher's mailbox. It was missing. Everything pointed to an internal breach, and whoever had planned it knew the system better than the staff themselves. The kids hadn't disappeared randomly. They'd been taken with precision. 3 days in, the school building felt less like a place of learning and more like an archaeological site under federal lockdown. Agent Mila Kerrigan, dispatched from the FBI's card unit, didn't start with interviews or witness statements. She started with floor plans. She believed that spaces, especially old ones, kept secrets better than people. Sitting cross-legged in the school's conference room, Kerrigan laid out 3 sets of blueprints: the original 1979 construction, the 1996 HVAC retrofit, and the 2004 renovation after asbestos abatement. All 3 had something in common. The East Wing had 4 classrooms, 4 clear rectangles, 4 doors. But when she physically walked the hallway herself that morning, there were only 3. Room 1, Room 2, Room 4, no Room 3. The corridor ended in what looked like a solid wall painted with a cheerful mural, children holding hands under a rainbow. The mural had been there for years. No one questioned it. But on closer inspection, Kerrigan noticed a seam running vertically through the plaster. Hairline. Invisible unless you were looking for it. Beneath the mural, something had been sealed. She called in structural engineering support from the local field office. Using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, the team confirmed it. An empty volume existed behind the wall. Rectangular, roughly the size of a standard classroom, there was also a heat signature, faint, residual, recent enough to be human. The FBI authorized breach within the hour. A demolition crew carefully cut through the mural and drywall, exposing a steel door, painted over and welded shut. There was no knob, no keypad, no external lock. Someone had wanted it to disappear. After 3 hours of cutting, the door gave way. Behind it, a narrow hallway, concrete floor, unpainted walls, no windows. It descended on a slight slope, dug down beneath the school foundation. This wasn't part of the school's original structure. The hallway was wired with makeshift lighting, extension cords nailed to the ceiling. Fluorescent tubes buzzed dimly in the stale air. At the end of the hall stood another door, iron, industrial, and bolted from the inside. The smell coming from behind it wasn't decay. It was lemon cleaner and chalk dust. A classroom, one that officially hadn't existed in 2 decades, and someone had been using it, recently, repeatedly, purposefully. Room 3 hadn't vanished. It had been buried alive. It took 2 cutting torches and over 4 hours to breach the final door. By the time agents stepped inside, even the seasoned among them hesitated. Agent Kerrigan entered first, flashlight steady, sidearm drawn. What she saw stopped her mid-step, not because it was violent, not because it was grotesque, but because it was intentional. The room was a near-perfect replica of a kindergarten classroom. There were 17 desks, each painted a different pastel color, each with a small name card, laminated, handwritten in careful block letters. A bookshelf against the far wall contained weathered children's books, mostly from the early 90s. The Rainbow Fish, Clifford, Green Eggs and Ham. Some covers had been re-laminated by hand, as if preserved with obsessive care. On the walls, murals of trees and animals were painted with faded tempera strokes. Not professionally done, more like a patient hand copying from memory. Stick figure children smiled in crayon. Above the whiteboard, block letters read, "Today is a beautiful day to learn." In the center of the room was a small stage, about a foot high. On it sat a teacher's chair, rocking, wooden, and a corkboard titled, "Our Garden of Good Choices." Thumbtacked to it were crude paper flowers with names like Ethan, Maya, Jaden, and Avery written in childlike handwriting. Near the door were 17 pairs of children's shoes, carefully lined up by size. No children, no blood, no restraints. But there were signs of life, disturbingly recent ones. Half-eaten apples on 2 desks, a plastic cup of juice still wet with condensation. A wall calendar marked Tuesday, April 12th, with a gold sticker for all present. On the far wall, a mounted camera watched silently, its red light blinking. There were 2 small sleeping cots in the back, pushed together under a wool blanket. Beneath them, FBI techs found a small electric space heater, a container of anti-nausea tablets, and a packet of motion sickness wristbands. Kerrigan noticed the faint hum of ventilation. Artificial airflow piped in from somewhere above, filtered, and temperature-controlled. Whoever had built this had considered the children's comfort. Their routine, their perception, but not their freedom. This wasn't a prison. It was a performance, a simulation designed to make the children believe they were still in school, still learning, still obeying. The kind of room a child might not think to escape from, because they'd never been told they were missing. No footprints led out, no exit signs, no windows, just the locked iron door behind them. 17 desks, 17 names, but not a single voice. At exactly 6 a.m. the following morning, the surveillance feed from the underground classroom flickered to life on the monitors at the temporary FBI command post. No one had touched the system. No one had sent a signal. The feed simply appeared. Static at first, then a low-resolution video image. The interior of room 3, lit by overhead fluorescence. It looked identical to the space they had physically breached the night before. Except now, it was clean. The juice cup was gone. The apple cores had vanished. The cots were perfectly made. The whiteboard had been wiped down and rewritten with a new date, Wednesday, April 13th. Below that, in the same loopy handwriting, "Today, we learn about animals that live in the dark." At 6:02 a.m., the voice began. It was female, mid-40s perhaps, warm, gentle, like a teacher trying to soothe an anxious child. "Good morning, my little roots. Are you ready to grow today? Ms. Flora is so proud of you. Let's take our deep breaths together, and then we'll begin story time." No person appeared on screen. The camera was angled downward slightly, capturing a view of the empty room from one high corner. But whoever was speaking seemed to believe they were being watched. Or worse, watched by an audience that wasn't there anymore. "I saw you listening so well yesterday, Jaden, and Ethan. Thank you for keeping your hands to yourself. Maya, your flower is growing beautifully." As the voice continued, Agent Kerrigan stood frozen beside the tech monitoring station, arms crossed tightly. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. There was something profoundly wrong in the way the woman spoke, not just the content, but the rhythm, the timing of pauses. It sounded rehearsed, timed like a script. And that, in many ways, was worse than if she'd been improvising. She wasn't responding to anyone. She was performing, as if someone had recorded a school day routine and was now playing it back on a loop, for whom no one could say. Every 20 minutes, the scene changed slightly. A new whiteboard message, a new story read aloud. Directions for a craft project no one completed. Once, she began to sing. The itsy-bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Her voice cracked slightly on the word spout, as if caught off guard by her own loneliness. No children ever appeared. Not once. The camera feed cut to black at 12 o'clock p.m. sharp. No warning, no closing words, just silence. Then the red recording light blinked off. The broadcast was over. For now. The breakthrough came not from forensic evidence, but from paper. Decades of it. After 48 hours of stalled leads, Agent Kerrigan requested a complete scan of historical employment records from the district archives, including personnel who had been purged from the digital system before 2000. The files arrived in battered boxes, still bound with rusted paper clips and yellowed string, reeking of mildew and long unread secrets. A team of analysts from the Bureau's Behavioral Division combed through each page. Termination reports, internal memos, handwritten complaints never escalated beyond administration. Around 2:40 p.m., they found a personnel folder that had been sealed but not shredded. Name: Flora Danning. Position: kindergarten classroom aide. Hire date: August 1987. Termination date: April 1991. No photo, just a clipped signature. The file was slim, almost surgically cleaned. But a second folder, less organized, stained with coffee, offered context. A series of parent letters, memos between teachers, notes from the school psychologist, concerns, whispers about strange methods, isolation chairs, excessive repetition, forced quiet time that stretched hours. Flora was said to use a system called the garden, where good flowers grow with silence and weeds get plucked. But there was no official investigation, only a brief note from a then principal. She's creative, but perhaps better suited to non-instructional roles. She was let go quietly. No charges, no public notice. Then came the second name, Reed Mahler, custodial contractor, active, 1986-1991. Hired through a third-party vendor, he had no school email, no background check on record, standard practice at the time. A side note in one memo linked him to Danning. Spends time in her room after hours. Approach with caution. There were no formal complaints against him. Only a teacher's scribbled comment during a staff meeting. Kids are scared of the janitor, think he lives under the floor. Together, Flora Danning and Reed Mahler had occupied the same building, the same hallway, the same classroom for nearly 5 years. Then both names vanished from the school's system within days of each other. Their connection wasn't just circumstantial, it was operational. They had built something then, quietly, invisibly, and now, decades later, they had returned to it. When Kerrigan pinned their names to the investigation board, the reaction in the room shifted. No longer a question of who. The files had answered that. Now came the real question. Why room 3? And why come back after all this time? At 4:17 a.m. on the 7th day, the feed returned, unprompted. No warning, no change in interface. One moment, the screens at the FBI command post in Clover Hill showed static. The next, room 3 lit up again, washed in the same sickly fluorescence as before. But this time, the camera's angle had shifted slightly, tilted downward by a few degrees. And there was someone in the frame. A girl, 5, maybe 6, thin, pale, hair in a tidy braid. Avery Morgan, confirmed by facial recognition just 2 hours later. She was sitting cross-legged on the alphabet rug, hands resting gently on her lap. Her posture was rigid, almost artificial, as if she had been posed rather than settled naturally. She did not move. She did not blink. She simply stared ahead, expression neutral, distant, and disturbingly calm. The audio feed was dead. No music, no voice. Only the flicker of fluorescent hum, visible but silent. At 4:22, another figure entered the frame. It moved at the very edge of visibility, partially obscured by the shelving unit at the back of the room, just enough to suggest presence but deny identity. Male, tall, thin, wearing what appeared to be dark coveralls. The image glitched for half a second as he stepped closer, never revealing a face. He stopped behind Avery. Didn't touch her. Didn't speak. He simply stood there. The feed remained static for over 5 minutes. The man's presence unchanged. Avery unmoving. Then, without cue or transition, the feed distorted again. Horizontal bands of gray and static ripping across the screen like tearing fabric. The image returned for a split second. And both figures were gone. The room was empty. Again. Technicians in the command center scrambled to capture frame data. A junior analyst flagged a tiny anomaly, a metadata shift in the video stream's origin, showing it had briefly pinged a nearby cell tower less than 15 miles away. It was the first traceable location in 7 days. A cell tower embedded near a state-owned patch of decommissioned woodland, long declared inaccessible due to environmental hazards and budgetary neglect. Now it had a purpose. By 6:15 a.m., agents were already in the air. Infrared drones deployed, ground units in motion. The signal had slipped. Someone had made a mistake. After a week of faceless horror and staged performance, they were finally hunting something real. Not ghosts, not recordings. A place, and maybe, just maybe, the rest of the children. The road ended long before the signal did. Agents had to abandon vehicles and continue on foot, guided by handheld receivers calibrated to trace the fleeting pulse that had leaked from the feed hours before. The forest around them was old and dense, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, not peaceful, hollow. At 7:42 a.m., drone footage confirmed the target, a weather-worn modular structure camouflaged beneath sagging camouflage netting and dead branches. To the untrained eye, it looked like an abandoned septic relay or a shed slowly giving in to rot. But it was more. Beneath that shell was reinforced concrete, solar-fed ventilation, and steel-lined doors sealed with magnetic locks. At 8:03 a.m., breach protocols initiated. Flashbangs weren't used. No one wanted to disorient children. Entry was surgical. The interior was silent. No alarms, no defensive systems. Just rooms. Artificial rooms. Miniature classrooms with laminate floors and construction paper crafts taped neatly to the walls. Plastic chairs. Charts of good behavior. A laminated daily schedule repeated across every door. Morning circle, snacks, learning time, nap, review. Then they found the holding room. 17 children, alive, each one laying on a cot under weighted blankets, wearing matching pale blue pajamas. All were sedated, pupils dilated, confused but responsive. Several began crying when they saw unfamiliar faces. Others just stared, as if awaiting instruction. They had been kept in strict isolation. Each child had a folder, names, progress reports, behavioral notes, written in tight, looping script. The same language from the underground classroom in the school. At the back of the facility, beyond 2 locked doors, they found her, Flora Danning, unarmed, gray-haired, thin as a reed. She stood at a sink washing her hands when the agents entered. She didn't turn to face them. "Be gentle when you wake them," she said, as though giving a final instruction to a substitute. "They get disoriented." She didn't resist, didn't plead, just smiled faintly and whispered, "We did what the world wouldn't." We made a place where they could grow right. No noise, no poison, just lessons. Her partner, Reed Mahler, was not found. The facility's blueprints suggested a service tunnel that led into the forest, but by the time agents traced it, it was empty. The children were airlifted to a regional hospital. Medical exams began immediately. They had no bruises, no burns, no overt trauma, but their eyes didn't track light properly. Their speech patterns were scripted, responses rehearsed like lines. Some still called out for Ms. Flora in their sleep. The Clover Hill community would never be the same. The school sealed Room 3 permanently. Not by order, by choice. Some rooms weren't meant to be reopened. Some doors, once closed, should never be unsealed again. Because what had happened wasn't an accident. It was a lesson someone desperately wanted to teach.